Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. My guests today are Kristina McGrath and Sarah Walworth. Welcome to my channel, ladies.
Hi, Irina.
So you are about to publish a very exciting book for the knitting community called the Knitting Pattern Writing Handbook, right? I did say it.
It's a long title.
It is.
So before we talk about the book, and I want to get into like all the nitty-gritty of how the idea of this book was born and what the process was like, let's talk a little bit about your knitting journey. How did that begin? And Kristina, you didn't start with knitting, you started with yoga, right?
Yeah.
Connected.
Well, so I had a pretty hardcore yoga practice for about 10 years. And when I started having kids, I found it more difficult to keep up. And I was reading in a yoga magazine one day that knitting is the new yoga. And I am not a crafty person. I don't like crafts, or I don't know how to sew. And, it's just never been something I enjoy. And I was like, oh, what's this knitting? So of course, I have people in my family that did beautiful knitting and sewing and never was an interest of mine, right? So I went down and took a nightlife class and learned how to knit. And oh my God, I got pretty obsessed immediately and never looked back. Got pretty obsessed.
It's one thing to just learn how to knit. You now, guys, together wrote a book about teaching tech editors how to tech edit, teaching the pattern designers how to write a proper pattern. What was that journey like for you? Like when you from being a knitter to understanding how to actually write a pattern and how to become a tech editor?
Well, that happened because of us becoming tech editors in our businesses and what we were seeing on our desks. So it was the experience of working with patterns and working as tech editors that we learned all that.
Right. Sarah, what was your knitting journey?
My knitting journey was being in a closed, kind of a claustrophobic space with my kids. I homeschooled my children in the Bay Area and in a small condo with not a big yard. And I needed something to do with my hands. And so I retaught myself how to knit, even though I had learned it as a kid. I needed something to do while I sat there and took care of my children. And the cool part about it was everything that I had learned previously related to garment construction, because I learned from my mom and my grandma. It came into the same thing. So I couldn't work through a pattern without changing something. I still can't, I'll be honest with you. I cannot work through a pattern just as written. It drives me crazy. I got to change something. And so I started to modify things, and I started to get deeper into how things fit, how to make knit fabrics work on a body. I love to make sweaters. And so then that began a deep dive. And then when my kids were getting older and I wanted to do something outside the home related to work again, I looked into becoming an editor. And I could not put my head around editing medical books or white papers or ads or anything related to corporate America. I was just going to die if I had to edit that stuff. And I ran across a website that said that there is copy editing for knitting patterns. And I was already obsessed with the craft. I was really obsessed. I couldn't go through a day without spending many hours knitting. And I had been in a lot of patterns. So I was like, oh, I can do this. And I think Kristina had the same experience when she ran across the same website. And so I jumped in both feet right away, wanted to be a knitting technical editor. And it was like the angels sang and unicorns and rainbows for me. The fact that there was this job that I could do in my craft and also use all the tools that I had in my brain about editing.
It's sort of that same using what's in my brain already. Like when I found out about tech editing knitting patterns, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, you got to be kidding me. It's like something I know so well is these patterns and how that all works. And then all the like things in my brain I'm good at, and these little skills I have that I hadn't really found a profitable use for, right? Like I hadn't really found what, like, because I was home with my kids. I wanted to work part-time. I didn't want to work full-time. And so this just fit what I already was good at and what I already knew, and something I could enjoy and do from home. I mean, it was just like ticked all the boxes. I mean, I couldn't even believe it. I mean, Sarah and I have said before, like, I felt like this was made for me. I couldn't even believe
Yes.
this existed. Like, so and then we got obsessed. We like fell into, doing that pretty hardcore too.
Yeah.
If one wants to become a tech editor and they haven't met you two who make it very easy, how do they go about it?
Well, right now I run the Tech Editor Hub, which is an online platform that we host classes to teach people the beginnings of becoming a tech editor. So if you are an advanced crocheter or an advanced knitter, or maybe just even intermediate, you can come in and take the course, and within 6 or 7 weeks have the basic checklists and everything that you need to do to begin your business as a technical editor. But a lot of people we know don't take a course too. They may just have started within the framework of working with designers, working in a publishing platform like a magazine or something along those lines. Or perhaps they're a master knitter or a master crocheter, and they just help people with their patterns. Some people also do like work as in a mentorship or an apprenticeship kind of thing with another technical editor to get started. There's lots of different ways to become a technical editor, but you have to have the craft behind you. You have to have a lot of experience up front within the craft. You have to be able to know, hey, this doesn't work here. When you're looking at a pattern, maybe all the numbers are right, but maybe other things don't work together. And I know Kristina's talked a lot about this in her Substack, in her articles, how even if all the numbers are correct in a line, that doesn't necessarily mean that the whole pattern, all the parts linked together work well.
I think it's really important, no matter how you end up beginning your journey as a tech editor or your work as a tech editor, but you've got to be, like Sarah said, you've got to be really comfortable with the technical language of a pattern. You have to understand why the things are the way they are in patterns and how it works. Like, you have to be comfortable with that, I think, because that has to already be automatic for you so that you can do the work of editing, I think.
Well, Kristina, like you mentioned to me that the body positivity and size inclusivity is very important to you. And I know that like a lot of people, there's like two schools of thoughts that I encountered. There are people who think that certain body types just look better in certain garments. Let's say a V-neck for a full-chested girl. And then there is a school of thought that thinks, you should be able to wear whatever the heck you want to wear, whether other people think it's fitting you or looks good on you. If it makes you feel better, if it makes you feel beautiful, you should make it for yourself. How do you teach people to be able to do either of those things?
I mean, a knitting pattern is clothing, and clothing is very personal. What we choose to wear and how we choose to present ourselves is very personal and needs to be that person's own decision. So I think if you approach writing patterns that way, that it's just not up to you. It's not your business or your decision whatever knitter picks up or crocheter picks up your pattern, what they want to wear. Like, it's not for you to say. I mean, I think that for me, it's simple because it's not your decision. Same as a tech editor, it's not your pattern, right? The designer needs to make the choices to make it correct. And the knitter's going to make the choice of what they want to make and what they want to put on their body. So while when you're designing a pattern, you're going to write whatever design is what you want to do and what you feel good about doing. And you're going to put the pictures on your pattern that are how you envision that being styled. But if you make it available for all these sizes and shapes, then the knitters can choose whether they want to make it or not. It's just not up to you.
The fact of the matter is there's a lot of cultural shoulds. Like, you should, if you have this body type, then you should wear this. And if you do this, then you should have this. But we're firmly in the camp that that's not our decision.
It's really damaging.
I think it's damaging because it's taking away the maker's agency. And so a lot of times we help our clients and we help the people who would learn from our book. We have a whole chapter on this kind of stuff in our book, is the fact that you're going to create a design as a knitwear designer. You have an idea of what it will look like. And what you do is you put all the pieces in place in your pattern so that the maker gets to decide how big it is on their body, how close it is to their body, as far as, if it's relaxed ease or oversized or tight fitting. If you put all the information in your pattern in a certain way, it gives them agency to decide. You don't get to decide what they do with it.
And it's funny because I've seen, like, as a specific example, Stephen West Pinguino made out of scrap yarns, made out of brand new yarns, made for little babies, made for people who like, size 60-inch chest circumference. And it looks like very different, but it's the same, like, very funky sort of idea of a garment, but like not two of them look alike. Right. So it's almost like this recipe of, like your grandmother teaching you, like, put a, pinch of this and a pinch of that, and all of those same dishes are going to taste completely different. And I love that, the fact that like knitters do that, like they change the patterns, they create their own version of it. Is it difficult for designers, and like, do you talk about it, to let go of their pattern, to see like what people make with it and not feel like this was my idea, this was my baby, and you're just changing it drastically?
I think it's hard for designers to hand it over for technical editing. I think initially, don't you think, Kristina? I think like you said, it is their baby. So when it comes to our desk and it comes across as, when it's ready to be checked for all the parts work together and there's clarity and all the stitch counts work and everything makes sense, they've already spent a lot of time in that pattern. And they've spent maybe months, some longer than, maybe a year. And so then they hand it over to be corrected. And that's a little frightening for designers, especially if they're a little bit less experienced working with a technical editor, or they've had a bad experience with a technical editor who points out all the mistakes in a way that's not kind and not supportive. So I think that part right there, like once they get through the editing and then maybe through a testing stage after the editing, I think they're probably ready. Please buy my pattern. Please make it. Do whatever you want with it. It's yay for making it. Yay for buying the pattern.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, Irina. I think it can be different. I think, designers are going to feel ownership over their pattern and their design, right? And have a certain way that they envision it. And so it can be maybe difficult I always encourage designers to totally embrace modifications that knitters make. I mean, so much of knitting is mods. It's so much like yarn substitution, like Sarah said earlier, making it bigger or smaller than maybe the designer intended because it's what you want. Mods is what it's all about. Longer, shorter sleeves, whatever. So I think the designer's job isn't to police like the mods that might get made or worry about what the knitter does, but to make sure that what they are offering and promising is clear and is what the knitter will get if they follow the instructions. So when we're editing, we want to make sure that the pattern offers the same fit for every size so that the knitter has a place to begin that they can expect and know what they're going to get. And then I think the designer should embrace those modifications that knitters make. That's what it's all about. And it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool how knitters, like Sarah said, have agency over their own work. And I think have we said this in the book? I can't remember now, but it's kind of like the designer is doing this all the tools, making sure it's correct and they've done the best they can. And then there's a handoff, you know,
Right.
like then it's the knitter's pattern and it's the knitter's work. And that's great, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Let me ask you this. I've been interviewing Rowan Yarns for the whole entire month of September, and my whole September is dedicated to everything that Rowan does, from designing to publishing to yarn production and everything in between. And they have like very specific way that the patterns are written. They call them like Rowan style patterns. So they have people who write the patterns. The designer would come up with the sketch, the idea, and the swatch, and then there are people who writing those patterns and edit them and sample knit and all of these things. Whereas the independent designers on Ravelry, I mean, every single person has their own style of writing a pattern, their own sizing, their own grading techniques, their own ideas of how it should be written, and some patterns written like very concisely, minimalistically, and then some patterns are written as a book. What's your feeling about having some sort of standardized pattern writing in this industry? Like, is that something that frustrates you as tech editors?
If you think about an independent designer, the same way you think about Rowan Yarn. So Rowan Yarn is like a design house. They have their style, like you said, that all patterns follow a standard style way of writing. So an independent designer is kind of doing the same thing with their patterns. They're wanting to make all of their patterns the same style of writing so that they will have a cohesive style that they present to the knitters, that the knitters can come to expect and trust their patterns. The same way that Rowan is doing that. So we're not necessarily trying to standardize how the patterns are written as far as style choices, but to make sure that whatever style choice is being used, that it's not confusing and that it is correct so that it can be followed in a simple way. But it's
consistent too.
Yeah, but consistent to whatever style is the designer's choice and how they want to present their patterns. Like that's still up to them, but so that it's correct.
I would put forth that looking at an independent designer as a design house is really smart. If you look at any of the major fashion designers, they all have a certain way of doing it. They all use certain music on their runway. They all use certain shapes and styles, and maybe the cuts, the way that everything is fit together into a collection. And in the same way, an independent designer can have their own style in the way that they use the technical language, and it becomes a part of their brand. The way that they lay the pattern out on the page. And this is a way actually that they can cultivate or curate superfans. When they do things in a certain way and they're very consistent from pattern to pattern to pattern, in the way that maybe they write the increase instructions, or maybe they have a text box for certain kinds of techniques, or maybe they put all the charts at the end. This way of doing it is their particular style for their brand. And when knitters connect with them in that way, and they love the way that the pattern is written, and it makes sense to them, then they're going to want to buy every pattern that comes out. And so I think good style, consistent style, no matter what it is and how you choose to do it, as long as you're consistent, it becomes part of your branding. Now, there can be styles that don't work really well. There can be things that that's going to make things more confusing. And that's where it comes in to work with an editor. An editor will help you see it from the maker's perspective and will help you say, hey, this might not make sense to do it this way. And I don't know. I am not of any mind that we need to standardize anything except, well, I don't know. Kristina, what would you say? Should we standardize abbreviations? I don't know. I don't know.
But I think I don't know, Sarah. I don't think it's about standardizing the abbreviations. I think it's the same thing as trying to clarify things. Like we're all about helping them have not confusing and correct instructions within the style that they choose, right? So it's kind of the same with abbreviations. There are designers who don't alphabetize the abbreviation lists, which we would prefer. They put it in the pattern in the order it appears in the pattern, right? But if you have an unwieldy abbreviation list with like 25 abbreviations and they're not in alphabetical order, your knitter's never going to find what they're looking for. So that's kind of a way to say this might be a roadblock or confusing to the knitter, and they might go to the list and get really frustrated that they can't find what they're looking for. So that's a good example, Sarah, of like how you might, you know, and any designer that I have pointed that out to has been like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, exactly. You're totally right. Wow, I didn't even think of that. Thank you. No one has been like, that's ridiculous.
Well, let me ask you another thing. You're running courses of teaching how to become tech editors. You offering one-on-one sessions with designers to consult them on tech editing. You're doing tech editing. Why write a book? Why share those tips with your customers?
All right, this is such a good question. So let me tell you, when we decided to start doing Tech Tip Talk during the pandemic, we decided to just be helpful. We were all home together.
It was chill. It was nothing.
It was chill.
It was laid back.
Nothing. We would go on Instagram once a week and just literally answer our followers' questions. And we didn't start, we started answering the same questions over and over and over and over. And we're like, it would be so great if we could have something to hand to people that would answer all their basic questions that we keep answering. And that's how we segued into, wow, we should write a book.
Well, we wanted to be helpful in like a, you know, because our whole sort of outlook, our arena is about sharing information, cooperation, you know, collaboration is important to us. And we think it's really important to lift everybody up and everybody on an equal playing field, right? Everybody having the same information. So like, we wanted to answer these questions, and everybody was we were, like Sarah said, all the same questions all the time. So if we could answer them, like just more people would see it, it would be helpful. You know, we just wanted a way to kind of be helpful and in a way that seemed to be what people were asking us, you know?
It did come back to like what Kristina said before. How do you know this? And we're like, well, we've tech edited several hundred patterns and we're in a community of editors and we all talk about this. But this knowledge was kind of limited within the editor community and it wasn't shared openly. And there wasn't a lot of blogs or anything like that with this information. And we felt like this information needs to be accessible, needs to be available. It needs to be easily found.
Yeah, because a lot of the things that we've come together and to do and know over these years and these patterns, it's all here. You're looking everywhere and garnering things from all kinds of places. And it can be difficult to find what you need. One of our guests was saying that she really wants to do her best and do a really good job for her knitters. And like, it's really hard to find this information. And sometimes when you're looking for the information on, for example, like grading or whatever, you don't always find even recent things. You sometimes find bad advice. Like it's just not always very clear you don't always find what you need.
Well, that's just the thing. That was like my next question, because when you start Googling anything on the, you know, World Wide Web, you don't know if the information you're getting there is right, if it's completely wrong, if it should be like done the opposite way, right? And same comes with like any advice you find on the internet, like YouTube videos, half of them talking about how to properly do a technique show something completely wrong that's not even
that's right. Look up Norwegian purl. You'll see all kinds of different ways of doing it.
Right. So like, is that part of the decision to write the book also?
Well, I think that the questions we were getting were accompanied by things that weren't right. You know, like
they said, I heard this, or
yeah,
somebody told me this.
or like, this is wrong in my pattern. Why is it wrong? Why do I not know that it's wrong? And how do I make it right? Like, so the questions were born out of, why is this not working in my pattern? You know, why? And I've consulted with designers where even just style or layout, or sizing, like not complicated, difficult, hours long grading, but like just a simple tip that makes them go, oh my God, if I'd only known that, that makes so much sense and makes my job easier. And now I get what the issue is, you know? And like things that you just don't think about. And when you know them, you know, so these questions were born out of things just tripping them up and not going right, but they didn't know why.
And, you know, we wrote this book before we even found a publisher for it. and we, because that's kind of how we are.
We were like, and they were like, well, you'd have to have a manuscript due to us by whatever date. We were like, yeah, we have that.
When we started working together with our editor and our developmental editor on the manuscript, it evolved even more, because here we had like these bits and pieces and ideas. To bring it into a cohesive whole as a book took some work. And also, you know, we got asked, well, why isn't this in here? What about a sizing chart? What about a standard for body sizes? And we're like, oh, so we even added that in. So it feels like the idea of creating a book to meet the needs in the community and to level the playing field, to make this community knowledge accessible to more people. It got even better as we came into the process with our editors working to create this manuscript into something that can be handed and put into people's hands.
Was that difficult to like allow the editor to play with your baby?
So things that made it better, we were glad about. But Sarah and I think us being editors ourselves made this process even more like intense for us, right? So when we would get notes back from the copy editor, the developmental editor, the proofreader, the expert, like we would go back to our original manuscript before we make changes they suggest, or before we answer, what were we saying? What do we think? And some of the questions that we got were that you were like, you know, this isn't right. We were like, hold up. This is one of the reasons we're writing this book, because this is what we want to say. And this is not what we want to say.
And so, we got pushback. Like they said, well, this isn't the way it's done.
Well, you know,
and we're like, yeah, but that's what we want to change.
That's part of the problem, right? Yeah. So, and the editors and, you know, people that we worked with were so fantastic. I mean,
it's unbelievably good.
Yeah. I mean, it's like took our content, had this, understood what we were trying to accomplish and what message we had about what we were doing, and really supported that in every note that they gave us. So
yeah, it was interesting. I remember us both like going, we're on this side of the desk now. We're being edited. And it hurt a little in a lot of little ways. And I'll be honest with you, it challenged our friendship. I will tell you, do not write a book or do any long-term business commitment with someone that you don't genuinely love and care about, because it will challenge everything that is, you will really find out what your friendship's based on. When you are working hard on something together, a project like this just kind of unveils all the little quirks of your personality, and it's stressful. You're working on a deadline, or you're working on a hard, like, how do we want to rewrite this? Do you want to rewrite it? Do you want me to rewrite it? You know, what word should we hear? I don't agree with this, you know.
Well, and how do you want to approach it? Do you want them, because we're doing all this on Zoom, right? And some of the, you know, while we were doing the writing, it wasn't like how we do now. We kind of run Tech Tip Talk it's a little less intense now because we're not also writing a book. But when we were actively writing this book for those 2 years, we were meeting for many hours a week, and it was intense. And we are different. We have so much that's the same about us, but we have different personalities too. So where we'd get edits back, we would have different reactions to them just personally, not even about how we would change it. But, she might bristle and be defensive about it. And I might be like, oh, okay. So like we'd have to sort of go to each other and be like, okay, so this reaction is about this. What does that say? And we'd go back to our original manuscript, and like, well, wait, sort of. So at the same time that it really tested us. It really tested us. But it also, I think, benefited the book.
It benefited the book. It also benefited our relationship together.
Having the two of us doing this book, it's better than it would have been if either one of us had done it.
100%. And, there's something that we say as technical editors. When we come into editing a pattern, we have this mantra. We say, not my pattern, not my pattern, not my pattern, not my pattern. Because your goal when you're editing a pattern is for the betterment of the pattern, for the best experience for the knitter, for the designer to get all the kudos, for there to be a fantastic finished piece that the maker can show off. And so as an editor, you might have a lot of pet peeves, or you might have a lot of ideas about how you think things should be, but it's not your pattern. And I think we, on the other side of the desk, being edited, kind of ran into that. Like, we had to kind of stand up for ourselves for a few things. Like, no, we really do feel like this is important. Or no, that changes our voice. Or no, that isn't what we meant. And it was really nice to have such fantastic editing staff to work with at Storey, where they heard us. And so we feel like we were warned. I'll tell you, we were warned before, be very careful working with a publisher, because you can lose your writer's voice. They can change things to the point where it's not you anymore. And I feel like
that didn't happen.
It didn't happen. And I'm so grateful for that. And I'm just grateful that when we would come forward and talk to our editorial staff, they're like, yeah, we do. We see that. Okay, let's do this instead. And it was really cool to be part of a team on that side of the desk.
I think there were some things that we definitely learned about how we communicate effectively and how we don't, right? We learned a lot of lessons about communication on this project too. And when it comes to breaking our friendship, I'm telling you, those illustration references, listen, we had to provide references for the illustrations in the book, like examples of what we meant. And I would say most of the images in the book don't exist anywhere. Like, we were not able to find examples. So we had a really hard time coming up with these references. And I'm telling you, I walked out of here one day, and I was like, told my husband, I said, I don't know if Sarah and I are going to last through this process of these references. Like, it was so difficult for us to do, and it took a lot of time. And there's a lot of references. Sarah, do you remember? I mean, so many that we submitted, like
hundreds.
Yeah.
So let me tell you the illustrations in this book. Lucy Engelman is the illustrator that Storey hired, and I'm so incredibly talented.
Oh my God.
But to try to explain to someone, when you have an image in your head of what you want to be illustrated, but there is no such thing, and you're not an artist and you can't sketch it, and you have to go find something that looks similar that they can work off of, that was brutal. We're like, we are not artists, we're editors.
Well, that's what was difficult, because we didn't really know in our descriptions what information they needed in the description,
right.
So it was really challenging. It was really challenging, but the illustrations are beautiful. What was really cool about we got sample copies. We have sample copies. So what was really cool about getting the book was that the illustrations we'd been seeing online this entire time from her drafts to her rough sketches to the final drawings. Okay, beautiful. But when you see it on the page in the book, Sarah, don't you agree? Isn't
I
it
totally
like
agree.
amazing, even
Yeah.
better?
So
Like,
you're going to get all the gushing from first-time authors here.
oh yeah, we really are in love with how this book came out. We really
We're
are.
in love with our baby. It's our firstborn, and we're like,
It's a really beautiful book. I mean, I'm serious. Like, I cannot stop smiling. It's such a beautiful book. Like, I love it. I love it.
Well, let's talk about your target audience, because this is something you hear on the internet all the time, right? Like whether you have a YouTube channel or tech talk or you're on Instagram, they tell you concentrate who is your target audience and concentrate on reaching your target audience. Who is your target audience for this book?
For this book, it's knitting designers and aspiring knitting designers. Now, when we first started our broadcast, we liked speaking straight to the other tech editors because we felt like there was some knowledge that we could share that way. But it's evolved into addressing directly the designers who are working, the independent designers who are working to put their designs into technical format, into a pattern that people can work from.
I mean, our audience has been knitting designers. And when we first started having guests and not just we're talking on a topic ourselves, we had intentions of having guests that were tech editors. That was what we wanted to do, was bring on tech editors to keep answering the questions we were getting. But we've been really loving having designers as guests too, because they know so much. That's important. Like, you know, it's been fascinating and wonderful for us. So our audience really is like niche. Like, you know, knitting is kind of a niche audience. So, but our audience isn't even just knitters. It's like knitting designers, and then it's kind of tech editors. But what's cool is that some of the feedback, and so that's who we're talking to, right? Like, so I think that's the kind of language that we're using. That's the kind of comfort level, whatever that we're using. And I wonder if we were talking to knitters, if that was in our brain that we're addressing knitters, not knitting designers. I don't know if the book would be different. But some of the reviews that we've gotten have been like, oh, I'm never going to write patterns, but even as a knitter, this book helps me so much understand the patterns that I'm using. And this is so helpful, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, wow, you know, we didn't even intend that. So that's cool.
I was interviewing Shirley Payton recently, and Shirley runs the design school, right? So she runs design alongs, and she's training designers how to become designers. And she told me that her belief that you don't have to be an amazing knitter to be a designer.
That's right.
Just to know basics, and you can learn how to be a designer. Like being designer is not the same thing as being a master knitter. So with that in mind, and I don't know if you agree with that point of view, but with that in mind, can everybody become a designer, you think?
I don't know if we have the authority to speak about designing.
I think generally in anything in life, if you want to do something, you can do it, but you have to put in the work to do it, right? It's not like you can't expect things are going to be easy. And it's the same way with writing patterns. And that's why I think it's important. This is not a design book.
This is not a design book.
This is not going to teach you how to design things. This is about writing patterns so that they are going to be good patterns, right? So if you approach designing patterns, writing patterns, designing knitwear as a business, and you approach that way, that you want to put out a good product that is going to be successful for knitters, then yes, you can do that, because there's ways to do that. I think when you're not successful is when you don't approach it that way, you know?
I really appreciate people like Shirley Payton and others who are stepping in to teach people how to design and to light that fire, that creative fire, to create things. And then our book comes after that. Like, here you have this design and you have this beautiful idea, and now you want to translate it into technical knowledge. And if you don't have a good pattern, it doesn't matter how good your design is, nobody's gonna Nobody's going to want to make it.
Because they won't be able to reproduce it if the pattern
to.
isn't written clearly.
And so that's where we come in, and we can step in that area where you already have your design and you're ready to go. And okay, now how do I get this into Word format? Because we're translating something that's physical into Word directions. And it takes some skill. That takes some skill and some learning. And it's completely different from design. I feel like, yes, you don't have to be a master knitter or, you know, even a master anything to be able to be a good designer. But you really do have to have some experience about what works well related to technical knowledge and technical wording in order. And we help our clients a lot of times. We'll be like, hey, go find a designer where you love their patterns. Like their patterns are super clear and you have no problem creating from them and mimic them.
There's a lot of things that you'll just be like, how do I explain this? Like, because you'll start writing it, you think it makes sense, and then you're like, oh, this is like crazy long, and there's got to be a way to simplify this. And most of the time there is, right? So you get help from a tech editor with that. You're going to get help from your testers who are going to be like, it would be easier for me if you had just said this, or and we do definitely help clients with that. And that's when you're talking about learning over time, same as we learned over time to be better at tech editing. When you're making all those decisions, every time you write a pattern about how you want to present something, how you want to say something, what works best for this type of construction, the way you present it, as you're making those decisions, you're honing your writing style and getting better at understanding how to write patterns. So,
and our experience as technical editors is there's a symbiotic relationship between a designer and a technical editor. If they work well together, the designer gets to be a better designer after working with a technical editor. We've been told, hey, I feel like I'm a better designer after working with you on 3 or 4 patterns. And as an editor, you get better working, seeing all kinds of different patterns and working closely with designers. You get a better idea of, oh, okay, this is important, or this isn't important, or I should mention this whenever I run across this. You become a better editor. So there is a beautiful thing that happens between a designer and a technical editor. And we pretty much say, if you want to be a good designer, you got to have a tech editor.
When you get really into the weeds with a client about a particular issue, and it makes you've got to put your brain on it and figure out this problem, right? So it's going to make you a better editor too. And there were a couple times that they asked us while we were writing the book for examples of things we were saying. And it's similar to what we always tell designers, like, don't assume that the knitter knows what you mean, because they're not going to know what you mean if you don't tell them. And so in the book, it was like, they were like, well, can you give us an example of this? And we were like, geez, what would we give for an example? Like, don't they know what we're saying?
Right. Since you are the only 2 people in the world right now that have that book in your possession, tell us what we can find in that book. Like, go a little bit chapter over chapter, and let's explain people like what they can expect from this book.
Well, we'd be pleased to do this. We are so over the moon with this. The first thing is we went back and forth on the order of everything in this book. And the book starts with Foundations of a Good Knitting Pattern. And this came out of a lot of discussions that we had on Tech Tip Talk about what do you need to include in a knitting pattern that makes it work really well. It's just goes deep into all the things. And at every end of every chapter,
basic tenets of editing is like what that chapter is like.
Exactly. And we go into style. And at the end of every chapter, can I hold up the book? Is a checklist.
Yes. Yeah.
At the end of every chapter is a detailed checklist that you can write in the book even, and take photocopy and just work through your pattern. And we feel like if you work through every chapter in this book with a knitting pattern, you're going to be more than ready for an easy edit with your technical editor.
Oh, yeah.
So, and we answer questions and answers that we've gotten over, those same questions and answers over and over and over again. At the end of every chapter, we go a little bit deeper into the material.
Yeah, there's a Q&A at the end of every chapter, and those are questions we got. Like,
those are from real people.
From our Tech Tip Talks. Like,
Mhm.
you can,
So we talk about the components of a pattern, like what are the parts that need to be included to make a pattern great? And we go for, oh boy, gauge. Now, gauge is everything.
But those components of a pattern, we also talk about why, right?
Right.
So that you can decide.
What do
Maybe
you wanna
I feel
include?
I don't need to include this, or maybe whatever. Like that. So that there's reasons in there. And the gauge chapter is good for a knitter too. The gauge chapter is
yeah, you might learn something as a knitter reading that chapter. Gauge is probably, if we ever run into a problem with a client on their pattern, we always swing back around. What's your gauge? This is a gauge issue. Gauge can be, because it's the basis of how everything is written. The number of stitches and the number of rows or rounds in a particular inch. It means everything. Now, chapter 4, I'll be honest, is on charts. Kristina doesn't like this chapter.
This chapter is so intense. Listen, this chapter is intense. I don't know how many chart images we made for this chapter to show what we're talking about. And these were things that I think most of these we created. Like
I did.
The chart chapter is packed. So what we found while we were whenever you're talking about charts, a lot of the questions we get, designers who want to provide charts, but aren't really sure how to create them or what or like, I have this chart, I have this design idea. How do I make it fit in a chart? Like, so it really is it's a lesson. I mean, that charts chapter is a lesson. It's good, but it's intense.
There's a lot of people we talk to who are not chart knitters themselves.
Right. But want to provide charts.
And they want to provide charts. They're like, so how do I do this? And just a hat tip to Stitch Mastery. That has been a key, a core software that we've used throughout our editing career. And it's just produces fantastic, beautiful charts. The next few chapters are pretty hardcore. We talk about sizing, how to create sizes, and what are the key components for creating things that fit all the various body shapes and sizes well. And we do. That was a hard one to do, because we talked about the details of like how on ease and measurements. And then the next chapter is all about common sweater pitfalls, which is beautiful illustration.
And that chapter is the only chapter. Is it titled that? Does it say common sweater pitfalls?
Common sweater pitfalls. Did you forget?
So that chapter is the only chapter that is specifically about sweaters, right? Like the rest of the book is about patterns.
Yes, right? Patterns in general, right?
And we'll specify things throughout the book that if there is a specificity to make, specification to make, but that common sweater pitfalls is just about sweaters, that chapter, and that's the only one that's like that. Anybody
who's designing will tell you, okay, I started with accessories, okay, now I want to go into garments, and it's a whole nother way.
It's a whole different
whole different way, because you're dealing with multiple sizes, different body sizes. Fitting a head for something is very different from fitting arms and torso.
And the reason for that is that there are multiple sizes in accessories, but there's usually only 1 or 2 points you have to hit. And they're usually more easily gradable because there's less variation. When you're talking about having to fit all those points at the same time, and there's many more of those points that all have to be fit at the same time, that gets complicated.
And especially if you're trying to hone a particular design and style into various body shapes and sizes, it's tricky. The last chapter that we went detail is how to work with a tech editor. We feel like this relationship between a tech editor and a designer is so key to the success of a pattern. And we just wanted to share, okay, here's how you know when a tech editor is good. Here's how you know what to do if some things go bad. Here's what to do on your side to get ready for tech editing. There's just,
I think that even might be the longest Q&A section.
I love this chapter.
We get a lot of questions about
Yeah.
working with a tech editor.
And then we provided a lot of our favorite resources. We are bookophiles, librophiles. What is the word?
Bibliophiles.
Bibliophiles. See, I don't even know what the right word is. So we made this is our favorite book list in the back. And we provided resources and information on making your patterns accessible for people who may not have the same, who may be visually not the same. And we also provide a style sheet sample, like how to write a style sheet. Like we talked earlier in this discussion about style, and it's really important that you actually write down your decisions. That's what helps you to become consistent within your pattern text. And last but not least,
we have a glossary. We have a glossary.
Well, yeah, indexes. Okay, so Kristina, go on about the index too.
I'm just excited. I love an index. It's how I use a lot of my books.
Right.
So I really wanted there to be a good index. So there's an index.
Well, because this is a reference book. We do not see this book as something somebody's going to probably sit down and read cover to cover. Maybe some people will, but for the most part, we think this might be something you're having trouble with this area of gauge in your pattern. What do I do? What did Kristina and Sarah say? And you can go flip to that section. Or, oh man, I really need to create a style sheet. Okay, go flip to that section. What parts do I need to include in my pattern? I
think the table of contents and the index are super valuable parts of this book.
And the final thing, and probably the most thing people are like, when can I have these, is our sizing standard. Yay. And we created these body measurement tables. We did a lot of research into how to do it. Hat tip to our friends at Neutrino who allowed us to use the body measurement table that they use to get some research in. And we created them not just for adult women, but adult men and infants and children.
Right. Well, what I hear a lot from the designers, because I interview a lot of designers, so the thing that I hear a lot, that it's very expensive to get a tech editor and you have to sell certain amount of patterns to cover that expense. And a lot of starting designers don't sell enough patterns to cover tech editors. Do you think this book will be helpful to those designers who just like trying waters to see if that's something they want to do full time in their life?
Well, like Sarah said, if you even if you just go through the checklist at the end of every chapter, or we also in the book, we have a pre-edit pattern checklist. That's also available on our website, that checklist. But if you go through the checklist, you're going to start out on a good foot with your tech editor, because there's going to be stuff there that's going to be right already, right? The cleaner the more you can do on your pattern yourself, the better, the less difficult a tech edit's going to be. The less mistakes that are in a tech edit, the less it's going to cost you, because the less time it's going to take the editor, and the less confusing it will be for both of you. I think also when people ask this question, it's really important to remember that while yes, tech editing is a cost, there are like a lot of costs to producing a pattern. Tech editing is a cost to producing a pattern. But if you don't do that step and you choose not to, absorb that cost or make that investment, people aren't going to want to buy your patterns because they're not going to be right.
Yeah, it's scientifically proven.
Shooting yourself in the foot.
Yes, it's scientifically proven that you can't see your own mistakes. How many times have you typed up an email? And I know in Google, I do this all the time. Typed it in Gmail, type up an email, hit send, and then go, oh, and you see the error and you hit undo, undo, undo. When you release a pattern with errors in it, there's no undo. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to my Hand Knitters Guild, and people know I'm a technical editor. They'll bring me a pattern and they'll go, can you help me fix this? Can you believe they did this? And they don't answer any of my emails. And there's so many mistakes. I rewrote the chart myself. let me tell you, your reputation as a designer hinges on how good your pattern is. So there's a lot of ways to make it work when you are just starting out as a designer. Definitely you can work through the checklist. That will alleviate a lot of things up front that your tech editor won't have to spend a lot of time on it. Your edit will be shorter, maybe cost less.
Maybe start with smaller patterns that aren't going to take as much time to edit.
Or there's in my community in the Tech Editor Hub, there's ways to collaborate with other editors. Some people do trades or barters.
Yep.
Some people will do an edit for free in exchange, and when they're getting started as a technical editor, in exchange for testimonials or for feedback on their work. Sometimes that can be iffy if the person doesn't have a lot of experience. But our viewpoint is you would never go and publish a book like this, right, if it hadn't had editorial eyes on it. And it's the same way, if you're in the publishing business and you're creating a product for people, you would never sell something that's got a huge flaw in it, because then that causes customer service issues, that dings your brand's reputation. And I'm afraid there's a lot of competition. You don't create a good pattern, people are not going to come back to you. They're just gonna be like, forget that. I'm going to go find someone who writes better patterons.
I mean, it's one more way of how you approach what you're doing and realizing what the tech editing really is and what it really means to your business. Because people will say, well, I have a free pattern. Do I need to have it tech edited? So your free pattern that you're offering as like a lead in for people to get to know your work, that's the one that most people are going to have. If it's wrong, or, there's sometimes, there's little mistakes that might slip through, right? But if it's not even been looked at, there could be a gazillion, right? And that's the pattern everyone's going to have. Right. If it's a disaster, why would they buy your patterns,
Why would they give you money if your free pattern's a mess?
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm very excited to visit your booth at Rhinebeck. So you're going to have a book signing at Rhinebeck. It's October 20th?
21st and 22nd.
21st, 22nd. And do you know where you're going to be, where people can find you?
We'll be at the Merritt Book Booth with the other authors signing books. I'm not going to say. I don't know where it's going to be. You got to look in the program. The Merritt Book Booth.
We'll be there Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon, and also Sunday morning. So come see us. We'd love to meet you in person.
We so much would.
Definitely. I'm stopping by and I'm having my copy signed by you. Well, I wish you the best of luck with this book. I think it was much needed in this community, and I'm sure people will flock to your table to take a peek at that and get this resource for all the designers, budding or not.
That's right.
Thank you so much for having us on, Irina.
Thank you for being my guest. It was lovely to hear how the whole process, all the agony and ecstasy of being a technical editor. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.